Hello and welcome to the Feminine Millionaire Show. I'm your host, Polly Alexander. I'm a success coach, intuitive healer, and a passionate creative. And I believe that we all have the power to manifest magic and miracles into our life. If creating success in a spiritual, feminine, and joyful way is your goal, this show is for you. You'll understand how to overcome your past, bring your soul's greatest gifts to the world, and up-level your income, impact, joy, and happiness. Let's all rise together. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Feminine Millionaire Show. I'm really excited to have a special guest on today who is a multi-talented creative. She has also been in my world, in my Thrive Beautifully Mastermind, and she's here to share her incredible creative journey and her wisdom. Sally Pasley Vargas is a freelance writer and the author of 4 cookbooks: Food for Friends, The Tao of Cooking, The Cranberry Cookbook, and The Blueberry Cookbook. She launched her culinary career as a line cook at Rudi's big Indian restaurant near Woodstock, New York. Her country neighbour at the time, Chef Eugene Bernard, frequently visited the kitchen to advise and mentor the cooks, and eventually arranged for Vargas to intern with pastry chef Albert Kumin at the Culinary Institute in Hyde Park, New York. Sally is a cooking teacher, coach, photographer, recipe developer, writer, and personal chef, and currently writes a weekly recipe column for the Boston Globe. Welcome, Sally.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. So let's start way back when, because I think it's really interesting for people to hear the journey of how you started to where you are now. Before I dive in, can you share how old you are now?
If I must, yes, I'm 77.
77, amazing. Whenever I see you and I talk with you, I do not see a woman who's 77. You're kind of timeless to me. And I think this is what's so interesting. And we're going to talk through the different generations and how your career's evolved. So let's start at the beginning. I mean, I think it would be really interesting to share with people the career pivots that you've made in your lifetime. How did you get started on this wonderful creative career?
Well, I think most people at my age would say they've had many chapters. And I guess you could say, like, in my 20s, I just finished college and I really didn't know what I was going to be doing. I had a degree in French. So I decided, okay, I guess I'll be a teacher, because at that time, that was like in the 1960s, late 1960s, most women didn't go into professions per se. I mean, it was like you get your MRS, and that was kind of what you were taught as a child. You're going to become a mother and you're going to have children and a family. That was kind of the trajectory that you learned as a child. And so I was a little bit at a loss. I had a degree in French, which wasn't particularly conducive, unless I wanted to be an academic. It really didn't have much to offer. So I decided I would become a teacher, which I preferred over being a secretary, which seemed to me what I could do at the time.
This kind of idea that you would be a mother, a teacher, or a secretary, was this kind of in the environment at the time and kind of what you received from school and family?
Yeah, I think it was from a lot from my family and also from the time. It was just the beginning of women's lib movement. So there were, of course, women who were leading the way in their careers. But, for instance, my college roommate went to law school, and she was one of 7 women in her entire class at Stanford. So women were not going into the law profession in droves at the time.
Let's circle back to your thinking at the time.
So, yeah, I figured, well, I should just get a degree in early childhood education. I could be a teacher. I had taken some courses in education in college. And I was particularly interested. They had a child study program at Vassar where I went to school. And it was interesting to me, just kind of the psychology of the young child and how they developed. So I thought, oh, I could be a teacher. And I got my master's in education and I taught for a few years. It was a struggle at the time. I was a little bit lost. And then my father died relatively suddenly. And I felt like the bottom dropped out and I was really at loose ends. And so I met a spiritual teacher and I decided to move to an ashram, which was also a very revolutionary thing to do in 1970. I moved to the ashram and the ashram had a restaurant and that's where I worked. It was in the country, upstate New York. I began as a waitress cooking. That was the kind of jobs that were available. I ended up cooking in the kitchen after I was not a very good waitress. We had a neighbor who had been a chef in a very fancy French restaurant in New York. He was teaching at the Culinary Institute in Hyde Park. They had a program for learning how to run a restaurant, and they had a dining room. So the course involved taking all the cooking classes, but also learning service and the back end of restaurant business. He came into the kitchen, but he wasn't particularly interested in women behind the line. He didn't feel women belonged in a professional kitchen. So he decided to send me for a short stage. It was about 2 weeks when the students were on vacation to learn pastry because he felt like it's okay for a woman to be a pastry chef. Mm. In fact, I had begged him for years over the course of the time that I knew him to let myself and another woman cook at the restaurant to go to New York before he had started teaching while he was still at the restaurant to let us come down and observe. And women were literally not allowed in the professional kitchen at the time of a French restaurant in New York City.
Wow.
So we were ushered in and out in probably 7 minutes, and the chefs were all sort of standing back and putting their heads back and looking over their shoulders and looking at these young girls. It just wasn't done. I think one of the exceptions at the time was Alice Waters, who had started her own restaurant in Berkeley, famously her restaurant Chez Panisse, and she had funding from her family. And so she was able to sort of bridge that gap. She didn't have to break in. And it took a long time. I would say another maybe 2 decades, maybe a little bit less for women to start to break into being professional chefs and running a kitchen. So I got to be able to learn pastry, which was fine. I was there for several years, and the teacher, because this was a spiritual community, and the guru, whose name was Rudi, he lived in New York City, and he would come to the ashram, which was a big old house on a back road, and it had been a hotel, and there were about 60 people living there at the height of the time. He would come and teach meditation on the weekends. And during the week, we all had jobs, and we had this little restaurant on the side of the road that was about a half a mile from the big house where we all lived. And suddenly he died in a plane crash. And at that time, then everything sort of went crazy, and a lot of people left. And I was one of them, or was one of the first people to move to another ashram in Indiana, which was led by one of Rudi's students, sort of a junior guru. And they had a restaurant there. So I moved there to Bloomington, and I took a lot of what I learned with me to help them with their restaurant, which was called the Tao. They had this little sort of quaint, hippie-ish vegetarian restaurant. So I started working there and helping them with their food costs and all the things that I had learned in New York. And then eventually I wrote my first cookbook, which was called The Tao of Cooking, and it was recipes that I had learned from either from my time in New York or that we had developed in the restaurant. So that was my first entree into the publishing world.
Okay, let's dive into that. How did you get started on the cookbook? What made you think I can do a cookbook?
It was a bit of naivete, for sure. And one of the customers at the restaurant was also, she was a editor at Indiana University Press in Bloomington. And she would come to the restaurant and she said, "You should do a cookbook." And I said, "Oh, okay, maybe I should." And so we decided to do the cookbook. And I just started writing it. And then I got the recipes and she looked at it and she said, "Well, you need to write head notes." And I thought, "Oh, okay. I don't know what those are, but you need a little introduction." So I actually wrote the entire book. I kind of figured it out. I was typing it up on an old typewriter using whiteout. And I finished the manuscript and she took it to a book fair. And she was sitting next to the owner of 10 Speed Press in Berkeley, California. And his name was Phil Wood. And Phil Wood had published the Moosewood Cookbook, which is another very popular vegetarian, hippie-ish kind of cookbook from a restaurant in Ithaca, which was another college town in Ithaca, New York, Cornell. So she handed him the manuscript, and I got a call from them pretty soon afterwards, and we just had a deal. And that was that.
Wow. So something that I hear that you seem to have done, perhaps not intentionally, but you seem to have called in the right people at the right time.
Absolutely.
It feels like these mentors and supporters kind of showed up on your path when they were needed.
Yeah, it was really, when I look back, I think just miraculous, really. I mean, I had some not so great influences at the time either, but, there was a little bit of a balance there. But I did have, on the plus side, I had, Milton Glaser, who's a very famous graphic artist. He did the logo for New York City called I Love New York, the I Heart New York was one of his most famous works, but he did tons of graphic design, and he had a column in New York Magazine called The Underground Gourmet. And he was a customer at the restaurant, and he was also a student of my spiritual teacher at the time. So he also had a hand in designing the book and doing some of the illustrations. And, he was just another person who came into the picture. Everything coalesced at the right moment. And I was just very lucky, and I feel like throughout my life, I've had these moments where people have just come into my life who've helped me or in some way helped me move ahead or have ideas of what to do next. And without my having carved out a lesson plan, it was like the lesson plan was given somehow from above, and I was following along.
And I'm curious, you were in a spiritual community as you started this journey. Do you think the work that you were doing spiritually and on yourself, do you think that contributed towards your ability to call in mentors just when they were needed?
I think so. I mean, I think it gave me more stability. I mean, at the time, I was very at sixes and sevens. My father had died. I didn't have very much of a family support, no financial support, and I had no plan. So I think the meditation every day, twice a day, the meditation and then the work in between was a very good foundation. Where other people were building their careers, I was trying to build some internal muscles. Although I eventually moved away from the ashram and from that particular practice, well, more or less, at least with the gurus, and went out on my own, it still did create a really good foundation for me internally.
What were those internal pieces that you cultivated then that you feel stood you in good stead, if you were to pick a couple of qualities?
Well, I think the idea of surrendering, and that's a difficult one to wrap your head around, because it doesn't mean just giving up. It means understanding what you have in front of you to work with and accepting that and embracing it and trying to be open to what there is for you in that. It might be something you don't like. In many cases, in many instances, it is. Something bad happens, or what you think is bad happens, and the ability to sort of stay calm inside, sort of take a deep breath and sit with it and understand why it's there for you and not to react. And I think that's probably something that you have to cultivate throughout your life. It wasn't something I just learned and walked away with. I mean, I'm still working on it. But yeah, it was really that kind of space that you allow for things to gel and to happen and to process and to embrace, the possibilities along with the hardships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautifully expressed. Thank you. So, in a nutshell, what happened after the first cookbook?
So then we adopted our son, and I decided that it would be a good time for me to just take a step back from working, and because my earning power wasn't really worth very much in terms of, I couldn't really make any extra money beyond childcare. So it didn't make sense for me to hire someone to take care of my child. And it was my delight and pleasure to have this baby and to be a mother. So I did that. As my son got older and was in school, then I started writing my second book called Food for Friends. So it was really a book of what to give to people for presents. And that was a lot of fun. After I wrote that book, I began to write for the Boston Globe food section. It was a lot to learn because writing for a newspaper is very different from writing a longer form cookbook. So I started doing that, and she started asking me to write more and more. And now I have a column every week. And I realized, I always tell people who are younger, I said, don't wait, just ask. The worst that can happen is they can say no, and then you can ask again. You can ask later. You can develop a new tack to approach them or figure out who else you might pitch your work to.
So, to recap on your journey, you started out in an ashram on a spiritual journey that led you into learning to cook and becoming a chef, that led you into creating your first book and then several more. And then that eventually led to you becoming a writer for the Boston Globe and creating recipes for them. So you've had this, when you look back, kind of a path that seems like it flows, although it wasn't intentional or organized or planned. Looking back now, what advice would you give somebody starting out?
Well, I think the best way to start would be to either start writing a blog and finding your voice. What are you offering and why you're offering it? And what feels good to you? What is your niche? Finding something inside of you that excites you and makes you interested in the whole field of cookbook writing or food writing, and then if you are interested in photography, just start learning photography.
How has your creative work changed as you've matured as a woman and artist?
Well, I think the main change is that I'm way more confident. And that has made me able to try things out more readily, experiment a little bit. I have always compared myself to others, and I've sort of had not in a good way. So I think learning to rein that in has been an important part, and to just keep myself in my lane and do what I enjoy and see what happens and be sort of open to what happens and then shift if it's not working.
Yeah. And I think that's something you've done so beautifully. And, as I've gotten to know you the last few years, I've seen you continually shifting and pivoting and being open to new things. I'm curious, what's the mindset for keeping excited about life as you age?
I'm one of those voracious learners. I mean, I want to take every single course that's out there, and I want to travel. I want to keep moving in a way. I like to see new things and be inspired by new things. And I think that has been what has driven me. I just love experimenting, learning new things, and expanding on what I know. I mean, and photography in particular is just a huge, huge art form and skill set. I could spend the rest of my life learning that, just keep on going, learning and working on that.
Yeah, so the learning's a big, big part of you creating energy and vitality and engagement with your path.
And also connecting with people in your area who are doing work that you love and being inspired by them. I think that's an important part too.
You've reinvented yourself even within your field, which when we look back seems to have more focus and coherence than I'm sure it felt at the time. What's one thing you had to overcome to reinvent yourself? Let's say the pivot from you were a mother for a while, and then you did the cookbooks, and then you went into writing the column. What did you have to overcome to be willing to do something different?
Well, as I think I mentioned already, was a lot of it was confidence and also understanding my own value, which I totally think, well, if I could do it, anybody could do it. But in fact, that's not really true. I mean, not everybody can do it, and not everybody can do it as easily as I was able to do it in some ways. And of course, that doesn't mean I'm great at everything, but it just meant that I do have talent. I felt like I didn't have any talent, and I realized recognizing my own worth and recognizing my own ability to learn things that I wanted to learn, and putting that together with sort of my excitement and drive to do so. I don't know if that's overcoming something, but it is how I've kind of navigated this career part.
Yeah. Can you share one inherited ancestral pattern that you had to transform or let go of? Some kind of programming you received from your family?
I think it was not to shine too brightly. It sort of flowed into not to have too much, not to make too much money. It was a lot of that because it would mean less for everyone else. So that was something I had to really consciously overcome. There's not enough for everyone. So be small.
Yeah. Yeah. Were either of your parents role models for reinvention?
Well, in some ways, my mother was an artist and she did everything. She did landscapes, she did portraits, she did watercolors, oils, sculpture. She worked in so many different forms of media. It was her life. I mean, that to her, that was the most important thing in her life, was her art. She had a great work ethic. And so I think for me, that was something I learned from her, a real gift from her.
I'm doing this series about women over 50 and how they've reinvented themselves. I find you to be such a positive person with such an appetite for life. What's better now than when you were younger?
Oh, just about everything.
I love it.
I think you just get to know yourself, and you know that sometimes it's going to take you your whole life to learn some of these lessons. That you have like a lesson plan, and to look at it that way instead of just being smacked and smacked down and just completely gobsmacked by whatever comes your way. You think, okay, I've been here before. I've gotten through this before. It's not exactly the same, but it's, you know that you're going to survive. I have more emotional stability. I have more inner strength. I have more confidence. I think being a mother too, having to really step up and mentor a little human being and give them the space to grow. I think that was really one of the delights of my life. Yeah, so that was the beginning for me of really loving my life and enjoying my life, was becoming a mother. And then it just got better from there. You become kinder and a little wiser, and you also become more empathetic, even though I have way overly empathetic at times, but you realize that on a given day, people might respond to you because of what's going on with them, and it has nothing to do with you. And you should, just give them some space to be who they are.
Have you gotten more patient as you get older?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not the most patient person, for sure, and especially with myself. But yes, I'm more patient with others. And, of course, motherhood will do that for you because you have to be patient with your children. I think patience and kindness are the two biggest things that you develop as you grow older, hopefully.
What's true abundance for you? This is a question I like to ask everybody that comes on the show.
It's definitely people, having people in your life. I mean, I think of the moments, your life is really a string of moments, and the magical moments that you're sitting at a table with your family, with your friends. The candles are getting low. The light is, you've had a great meal. You're loving each other's company. And it's just this magic that happens. And I think that's true abundance. Those are the moments that just your heart is open and you're just soaking up all this delicious energy of love that's around you.
Beautiful. And what's a story that your mind can tell you that you've had to dismiss as you age? You know, that thing we have on our shoulder that says, you can't do this, or who do you think you are? What does the little parrot on your shoulder tell you?
I'm too old and it's too late. And I've been saying that since I was 27 years old. So there you go.
And looking back, were you too old and was it too late?
Of course not. Of course not. Not at 27, not at 35, not at 40, not at 50, and probably not at 77. We'll see how it goes.
So let's look forward to finish. What are you most excited about in the future?
I think artistically, I'm most excited about photography and growing as a photographer and connecting with more people and maybe serving more people in a small way.
So what would you say to somebody over 50, getting older, and feeling this pull towards reinvention, towards doing something different? What advice would you give them?
I think, what are some of the things you might have regrets over if you didn't do? Then just start doing them to the extent that you can, and it will bring you joy. Whatever brings you joy, go for it.
And what do you think you need to believe to give yourself permission to do the things that bring you pleasure and joy?
I just think you have to believe that you're worth it, that everyone's worth it. Each human being has their own particular path. And when you recognize that it's okay that your path is not the same as anyone else's, and it's okay to like what you like and to not like what you don't like, and to just be okay with everything. Just stay cool, just grab some gusto. Just be who you are and accept that and relish it because you're not like anyone else.
Yeah, beautiful. What a beautiful answer. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. So people want to see your amazing work and experience the joy in your recipes and your beautiful words and photography. Where do they find you?
Well, I'm actually writing now. I just started writing on Substack, which is a kind of platform for writers. I'm just sharing recipes and sort of little tidbits of wisdom and fun. It's not very serious, but it's meant to bring people some lightness to their day and also have something to cook at night when they're tired. So I just started it recently, but that's where I am now sort of posting most of my thoughts and recipes. And I also have my own website, which shows my portfolio of my photography work, and also a whole lot of recipes on that blog there.
We will link to Sally's website and Substack in the show notes, and you can also follow her on Instagram, which I recommend. We'll put that in the show notes. Sally, thank you so much. Thank you for being on the show and sharing so openly and in such an engaging way about your serendipitous, unplanned creative journey through the last 5 decades. It's been fascinating to hear. And I think one thing that comes through for me is just the wisdom that you acquired along the way, the strength of character that you developed, the choices you made. Looking back, they just feel very, very daring, but also wise. So thank you for opening up about your journey. I think you're an incredible role model. I would love to have the energy and vitality and lightness and joy that you bring to life. And I think you're a wonderful, wonderful example of how to live life to the full as you age. So, as well as a talented photographer and writer in your own right, regardless of age. Thank you so much for coming on this show and being willing to share your story and open up about your journey. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure, and I always love spending time with you. It was truly a pleasure.
Thank you, Sally. I can't wait to see what you do next. Thank you for listening to today's episode, and I hope you enjoyed this powerful conversation as much as I did. And if you are in the dialogue around aging for yourself, if you're a woman in midlife or in your 60s, 70s, or even beyond, I invite you to join me on Tuesday the 23rd of April, when I will open up behind the scenes of embracing this next chapter of your life. I'm going to share what I've been learning over the past year, and we're going to talk about reframing aging. We're going to talk about how to get excited about this next chapter of your life, how to improve your energy levels, how to optimize your mindset and well-being. It is free for my community, and there'll be a limited time replay if you can't make it live. To register, just go to the link in the show notes. I look forward to seeing you there. Have a wildly abundant week. Bye for now.